Own Way, the podcast with me, your host, Kori McClurg. All right, welcome back to another episode of Get Out of Your Own Way. All right, so today I want to talk about something called cognitive dissonance. And to get into this concept, I want to back a little bit up to explain some research that will sort of help this whole thing come together. So starting in the 60s, there's a scientist, Michael Gazzaniga, and I think he's actually still alive. You can find him on YouTube. But so he started this research with these patients who had their left and right hemispheres of their brains severed. It was a surgical treatment for epilepsy at that time. I think that technique is no longer used, but while these patients were, they're still functioning people, but it gave research, it's science, this unique situation to be able to really understand what sides of our brain do what and how what that means, right, for our overall cognitive function. Before Gazzaniga did his work, there had been some other research that had already demonstrated that that the different hemispheres of our brain were responsible for different things. So, for example, your right hemisphere processes the visual information from your left eye. So it goes, this way. And then, vice versa. Right eye goes to the left hemisphere. They had also learned before he really started his split brain research that the left hemisphere is predominantly responsible for verbal processing, and the right hemisphere handles spatial processing. So having that, was critical as Gazzaniga started his research. So he did this just fascinating stuff where in his experiments, he would separate the visual field of the subjects so that they could only process information, with one eye and hence one hemisphere of the brain. So when the word face is shown to the right eye of the patient and you ask them what they saw, then they could say face because their left hemisphere is responsible for verbal processing. So they see it with the right eye, but because verbal processing, it processes face over here, and then they're also able to say it because verbal processing happens in the left hemisphere. But when you do it vice versa, you show face to the left eye, the subject can't say face, but they can draw, a smiley face because the right hemisphere does spatial processing. So that is all right, super interesting, right? But the really fascinating part is where Gazzaniga figured out that what we do to unify ourselves. So in the same example, where the subject could only draw the face, if you asked them why they drew the face, they would respond with something like, well, what do you want? A sad face? Who wants a sad face around? So the whole thing was, of course, they didn't know that they couldn't say face because of the different processing of their hemisphere. So they just made something up as to why they drew a face. And this is the crux of cognitive dissonance. So we will literally, and we see it very plainly and obviously in these split brain patients, but we are doing it all the time, where we will make things up to make it more comfortable for ourselves. How we see this in the real world, since our brains are, not severed, they're all, intact, is we will get this discomfort where because we have these conflicts in our brain about, our behavior, as an example. So, let's say we're acting in a way that's out of alignment with our values. Well, that makes us uncomfortable. But oftentimes, instead of saying, oh, instead of being able to see that logically and saying, well, I'm not going to do that behavior anymore, it's a very quick reaction, just like we saw in these split brain patients where they just immediately say, oh, well, what do you want? A sad face? No, we will like immediately have a justification for what we're doing as well. If you are, yelling at your kids, but you also realize that it's not helpful to your relationship with the kids. You hear people say things like this all the time, like, oh, well, I have to get mad at them. And because otherwise they just won't learn. And, I love them too much not to let them, flounder and not learn how things are. Like, we will justify our behavior in it's so immediate, right? So, it is this, like, it's almost like the fourth motivation. I don't know if you've heard the 3 motivations of seek pleasure, avoid pain, conserve energy. And this is almost like the fourth motivation of, like, proving ourselves right. And it happens just so quickly and so instinctually, as we see in these split brain patients. So, what do you do about any of this? I think that even though in the instance, right, that we often will do this unification, right, this kind of self-justifying, I do think we do that really quickly, but also I don't think the discomfort is not totally resolved. I think that especially if it's something where we're consistently doing the behavior, that discomfort's going to continue to be there. And that's where we have a chance to bring some awareness to it. Like, you can recognize that this whole, at first it might just be like, well, this whole situation is making me uncomfortable. And really, it starts before we can even, like, consciously identify or say that we're uncomfortable. Usually that kind of discomfort, it's going to be a tightness in your jaw. It's going to be like a kind of a tightness or just a discomfort, like in your chest or your stomach, or, there might be lots of ways that you feel this angst around this situation before you can even verbalize it to yourself. These are all opportunities to get some awareness around it. Once you've gotten the awareness around it, now that's when you can really start to dive in here and try to understand, like, I'm, I really do value my health, my longevity. But I keep, I keep going out and drinking too much. A few nights a week, I'm like out there, drinking too much, and, or drinking at all, right? Like, maybe I'd really rather not be engaging in that stuff at all. And so you can feel, what starts out as this feeling of, either disgust or or whatever. And certainly, there's all kinds of ways that we justify our behavior. I mean, trust me, I can't tell you how many times I've told myself all kinds of stupid crap to try to justify what I was doing, even though really my values were all around, being healthy and staying, as vital and vibrant as I could, as long as I can. And yet I was, doing this stuff that was just so antithetical to my values. So that's, that having that kind of awareness is really that first step to understanding, oh, there's like this cognitive dissonance going on. It's really helpful, these justifications that we've created for ourselves, even in the minute, that's where you can really look at that thought and just say, wow, isn't that interesting that I like justified this in this way? And you can start to look at it like, is that really true? Right? Like, is it really true that that yelling at my kids is helpful to them? Is that really true? I mean, or is there another possibility where it's not helpful, and that maybe there are other ways to teach them what I want to teach them without damaging the relationship with them? I think having an awareness around that as well, what's going on for you in those moments where you are creating these justifications, can be so helpful in just breaking down that thought, like doing some applying some techniques, so the ACT technique is an example of, is that really true? Or is there a better way to do this that is more in alignment with my values? So yeah, I mean, cognitive dissonance is just so fascinating. It's just so fascinating, like that we will do whatever. Our brain will just automatically do that for us, right? To keep us unified, and not have these two things going on at once. I mean, your brain just really does not want that to happen. They really, it doesn't want you to be in this discomfort. So it does everything it can to just immediately work through it for you. But there is hope, and we don't have to be, victims of our just immediate situation or immediate reactions. And we can, bring some awareness around it, bring our prefrontal cortex online, and work through it. So yeah, there's some great stuff out in YouTube land about cognitive dissonance, people that will explain it in other ways. So I will link some of those here, and hope you enjoy, because I find it just super fascinating. And this just whole idea that your brain will just take over and do whatever is necessary to prove you right. So I hope that's helpful, and we'll see you next time.